So it looks like I finally figured out a name for this guy. I've decided to name him 75 fucking hours.
75 fucking hours.
So, this video is gonna require a little explaining. In 2018, there was a review for Path of Exile put out by IGN. The review was by a dude named TJ Hafer, and the review was bad. It was a real oof, a yikes, if you will. The kids might call it a bruh moment, and that's how everyone reacted to it. Basically, it's another one of those reviewer is bad at the game and the score goes down because of it. His review gained a lot of ire from the community, and a lot of his problems with the game came down to the fact that his build was very, very exceptionally bad. Let me put it this way. If your build is good, you've got the game dialed down, you know what you're doing, it's probably going to take you 10 to 20 hours to get through the main campaign. You're going to be going fast, skipping quests, you aren't reading the text or paying attention to the story. But if it's your first time, thing is, your build is going to be bad. That's just the way of things. You don't have the game dialed down. You're going to be making rookie mistakes because you're a rookie. It'll take you maybe 40 to 50 hours to beat the main campaign, depending on how much you want to clear everything. It took this man 75 hours to beat the main campaign. One person crunched some numbers and found it would have taken him a whole hour of non-stop attacking to kill the final boss. And so I decided to make a video where I play the game using this man's build. So originally I was going to make this a funny joke video where I die a lot, but the more I played, the more I sort of realized I wanted to make this a rebuttal review for Path of Exile using my experiences with that build. But before I get into that, let's talk about the review. Actually, no, let's talk about TJ Hafer, the guy who reviewed it. So I did a little bit of research on this guy before I made the video, and based on his non-IGN YouTube, Loresworn Gaming, it seems like he mostly plays Grand Strategy or 4X games, which is fine. Those games are great, and he seems to be really good at them, but then why was he playing a super in-depth ARPG that relies on millisecond reactions, power gaming, and interacting with the community for IGN, the biggest video game review website? Well, he says he mostly only played Path of Exile for the review, so maybe they just told him to? And he's done other video reviews too for IGN. A lot of them have been for Grand Strategy games. He's also reviewed other, regular RPGs. He actually did a really great review for Kingdom Come. He might be one of the best boys working for IGN. I mean, at least his fucking mic quality isn't garbage.
Button presses that I just forget to breathe.
Damn, IGN at the forefront of video making technology with their fucking tin cans on a string. But I feel like in this instance, they're not really playing to the man's strengths. So the point here is that, all the people in the comments of the IGN video who are shitting on IGN as a collective rather than the dude who did the review, good, keep that up. They're the ones who at very least didn't fucking vet the review and let it go out there. This was a guy who mostly plays Grand Strategy games saying, I didn't like the Twitch skill ARPG. IGN is the entity who decided to make it a professional review, and were presumably the only reason he played the game at all, like they could have got someone else to do it. And he was presumably given a deadline, which might have stopped him from doing any research, even presumably as much as I did on him, which really wasn't even very much. And he might not have been able to even go into the finer details because he probably had a word count on the written review and a minute count on the video review because, IGN is a art review website that needs to maximize its profitability. And I want you to keep this in mind when I kinda shit on TJ for being bad at the game here. I don't want this to be a character assassination of him, and I hope that his streaming Grand Strategy games makes enough money that he can separate from the IGN tentacle and do whatever the hell he wants. 'Cause that's the fucking dream, man! Chase that fucking dream! So what is the thing that makes his build bad? Simple. He does no fucking damage. You can see him plinking away at enemy health bars that should die in 4 hits. He's using an attack that will never do as much damage as other attacks on his bar, and he isn't always utilizing all of the abilities he set up for himself, and I'll go into more about that in a little bit. But I don't want people watching this video to get confused. There is a point in his review where he says only a few builds are in-game viable, and that's absolutely not true. You can do anything in this game if you know how to. That's one of the big draws of the game. He also doesn't really talk about the endgame. He also doesn't talk about the leagues, and he also didn't talk about the Forsaken Masters, or their daily quests, the hideout system, or the crafting system. The point is, there's a significant amount of stuff that he missed, or just didn't talk about. There's also another point in his review where he says this about the bosses.
In absurd fights like this one, where it seems impossible to avoid all the garbage being vomited into the arena while still dealing damage, I felt like I was being told I might as well forget about Twitch skill or trying to pay attention to where I was standing.
So here's me fighting the boss with that build. Dodging her attacks is actually, yes, how you do it. You're supposed to use your Twitch skill, you just kinda didn't. You should use the movement ability that you have to dodge behind her and then attack, or use the Sunder ability that you have to do damage from a range, or use the totem that you have to do damage to her while you're dodging. But, then again, and in very much his defense, things have changed a lot since 2018. So, let's go back. Way back. Let's look at how the game has changed since I first started playing it. I started playing Path of Exile when the open beta dropped. I tried to get in the closed beta, and I couldn't. At this point, there were 3 acts. You had to play them 3 times in a row to get to the in-game stuff, you know, just like Diablo 2. I was looking, personally, for something more similar to Diablo 2. Path of Exile fit perfectly into that little niche. It was dark and moody, but also changed up the game in interesting ways. Skills weren't things you unlocked, they were gems you slotted into items, and nothing was class-based. So I could just make a witch who ran around hitting things real hard with a hammer if I wanted. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to make a billion skeletons and zombies, and the game sure did let me do that. And the skill system was basically all the game had on Diablo 2. It even had one less act than the base game of Diablo 2 without Lord of Destruction. Then the game left open beta. It added a final boss where you kill the guy who exiled you, like, you know, you'd think you would. And another character class that started in the middle of the skill tree. And then they continue to add things to the 1.0s, for instance, ghosts that are loot goblins, shrines that give you temporary buffs, monsters that have killed close together summon stronger ones, and the big stuff, a big in-game boss at Zeri, and it added Forsaken Masters, which were basically daily quests that gave you your own personal town and ability to fine-tune items with crafting if you leveled up your dudes enough by doing their daily quests. Then along came 2.0. This added a 4th act. It was a little shorter than the other acts, but it's honestly still my favorite one. Several new bosses and a final boss were added to this act, and that final boss was a lot harder than the last final boss. Also, it helped with the desync problems that killed a billion hardcore characters. The 2.0s added even more stuff than the 1.0s. Prophecies are an item you could get to make a random event happen. The Ascendancy, which gave each class a skill tree of their own if they beat a dungeon. They reworked the mapping system to make it a climb to the top with 4 mini-bosses and a final boss called the Shaper. He's a big fucker that kills you in one hit. There are breaches, these zones that open up and spawn enemies in them, and it gave Lioneyes Watch stairs. Then, 3.0 came along. Now, I got Dolson into the game a little bit after it came out of beta, and I remember we watched the announcement together, drunk off our asses. Here's a dramatic recreation of our reaction to that. Alright.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
cool.
X5's looking cool. Oh, dude, that's
Yeah.
swollen. So anyway, like I was saying, so sucking dick's definitely gay, we've established that, but eating ass is like basically the exact same thing no matter what you do, so I'm...
Well, now, hold up.
Well, what?
6? 7?
Oh!
Okay, they're introducing 3
What?
new...
What?
8? 9? Okay.
6 new acts. Gone were the days of playing through the game 3 times. Now you just needed to beat all 10 fucking acts it has once to get to maps. It was done pussyfooting around on Diablo's level. It was time to surpass it, like, Damn, this added a massive plethora of new bosses that were peppered throughout Part 2, and they're some of the best ones in the game. It removed the repetition of playing the game 3 times, which is honestly kind of a problem, and added a Super Satan final boss you fight twice. And I always thought Malachi was still harder. But whoo boy have the 3.0s been productive. First thing we got was another rework to the in-game maps. There were now a little minigame sort of deal on the map screen. You got 2 in-game bosses fighting each other for control, and you can do maps to grow or shrink each boss's influence on the atlas, and use that to summon other bosses. Then, instead of adding leagues that just added a new type of enemy, they started adding leagues that were minigames. The first one was Bestiary, which was Pokemon. The second one was Incursion, which was Build a Dungeon. And stop! This is when TJ played the game. He didn't talk about this mechanic, so I don't think he played in the league, but it's important to note that he played during this patch. Then they added Delve, which was this infinitely generated floor climb. Then they added Betrayal, which reworked the Master System, replaced the dailies with the fun minigames, and added a new one. Then they added Synthesis. Nobody likes Synthesis, so when it was over, they took it out of the game. And the next league, they scaled it down and just added a crystal that summons mobs instead of like a full-on minigame. But this is important to our story, because what they also added in this patch completely changed the way melee combat works, and basically gave it a huge buff for both players and enemies. This change essentially made playing a melee character fun, and it fixed some of the legitimate concerns in the IGN review. Then they added a tower defense minigame, and then we get to where we are now, the league that I played this character in. It's a build-a-boss minigame, and it's tons of fun. They also changed how the in-game maps work again, and added even more bosses. And the map rework is why I decided to talk about a year-old IGN review now, because like I said earlier, his video was billed as a review for the previous mapping rework, and he didn't talk about mapping, so I'm going to just title this Conquerors of the Atlas and also not talk about mapping. So why did I chronicle all of that? 2 reasons. The first being that a lot of what makes Path of Exile good is how far it's come, and how far we can expect it to go. It went from 3 acts at release, with a neat in-game mechanic that might keep you around for a bit, to 10 acts with 6 minigames, a ton of weird game modifiers, and several in-game bosses. Like, it went from an indie alternative to Diablo 3 for people who like Diablo 2 and wanted a game with more in-depth skills, to Diablo 3 can't even fucking compete anymore. The other reason was because this is a good way of showing you how long I have been playing this game with the same character. This is Thela. She's a necromancer. I started her in the beta. She is level 88. The level cap is 100. I've never gotten her to that. Now, when the skill tree gets a balance change to whatever it is you're doing, you'll be given a passive skill reset. Sometimes it's optional, and sometimes your part of the tree is reworked so heavily your build cannot exist anymore, so it is mandatory. She has been through many of these, and many changes, and only very recently has she been not garbage. And many times through my playing this game, her build has been worse than the IGN build. So let's finally talk about that. When I played this build, there was one thing I expected to do. It was die. A lot. And I did, but not nearly as much as I had expected. Now, Dolson was also playing in this league, and he was my backup if I, couldn't beat a boss or something. Now, he was playing a much more serious character that took advantage of the new bow changes and also a bunch of stuff having to do with chaos damage, including the aura that gives you a special minion that I only had to ask for his help twice, on essentially the same boss, a Various and a Various Reassembled. He had a lot of energy shield, and I just couldn't get it down. The rest of the bosses in the game, though, I could just tank and spank. I spanked for a long time, but they went down. You see, TJ basically put all of his points into defense. This isn't an invalid tactic at all. In fact, it kept me alive pretty good through a lot of the boss fights. A lot of them would have just killed me before I did any damage to them immediately as I entered the arena if it weren't for all of the points he put into defense. Even then, he's got a lot of skills that help. He's using Enduring Cry, which gives him endurance charges that give him a little bit more damage. He has an Ancestral Protector Totem, which is really good and can help put damage on bosses while you're dodging and dealing with adds. He has a Fortify Support Gem on a couple of his attacks, which give him more armor. Plus, a lot of people in the comments of his videos say he doesn't have a movement skill. This is wrong. He is using Leap Slam. Tweak his build a little bit and it's not bad. A lot of the problem is, instead of focusing on Sunder, he has support gems set up on Heavy Strike and Ground Slam. Ground Slam being just kind of a worse version of Sunder. Plus, he definitely needed a Quicksilver Flask. Like, deadass, I cheated through part of the game and put a Quicksilver Flask on his bar when I was fighting some of the bosses. But the point is, this is not a build you should just throw into the trash. It's not all bad. And the problems he had were a combination of two things. The first was that he played before the Melee update, and the second is that he's not super great at the game. Let's start with that one first. At one point he says,
And I eventually found myself semi-railroaded into certain tree choices and tactics that would not have come naturally.
Now I want to focus on come naturally. It seems this man's ARPG instincts aren't super good. In fact, I'd say they're super bad. I played this game with Megan, who the only ARPG she has played was a little bit of Diablo 3, and one of the first things she did was rebind her left click to an ability instead of using the auto attack because it just felt right. To her, she felt like that's what she should do. She intuited this based on how her auto attacks seemed to suck, and she didn't want to use them anymore. This was a good feeling. TJ presumably never did this because in the footage where he fights the final boss, he has the auto attack still bound to left click. Now, auto attacks are more viable in other RPGs, and some ARPGs especially, as Beef Killmen, because all abilities cost mana, and Beef Killmen don't have a lot of that, and sometimes mana potions are expensive. But in this game, you don't buy mana potions. You use a mana flask, a single item that recharges as you kill things, so as long as you're killing things, you have infinite mana. Especially seeing as you have a mana flask fit to refill the mana of a mage, so it's filling you up all the way with every gulp, but he still uses his auto attacks. He uses his auto attacks frequently in his video showing off his gameplay. But even with these abilities, you can see him only plinking away at enemy health bars. If he was listening to the game, he might have heard it tell him, "Dude, you're not doing enough damage." Playing this build, I was scrounging for axes that would give me a crumb of extra damage, because, I was following the build guide really closely, but if I could change it, I might have noticed that I did very little damage, and tried to fix that. He actually at one point said in his review that the game was too reliant on gear. Buddy, it is with this build. He could also have put some more damage into his skill tree, but he does not. He is also using a unique that gives him bonuses to ranged attacks, and he isn't using those. Actually, I'm really glad that I got this one unique that he used to drop for me too in the game. Now, remember when I said he shouldn't use an auto attack? Well, here's what the auto attack looked like when I played. You see, it hit everyone in a bit of an arc in front of me. It did not used to do that. It would hit one target when he played. It was bad when I was using it, and at points I cheated and made that button move only, but when he used it, it was way worse. But in his defense, all of the skills he used got huge buffs. For instance, Sunder, the ability he had the most support gems into, got a length and base damage increase, and that length was very useful. A lot of the bosses would also do melee attacks and just snap to you if you were in melee range. Now they do their attacks in a cone, and they changed movement skills like Leap Slam to be better at dodging. And all of the bosses have better tells now. Things have changed a lot, and this build, at the time, was way, way worse. But a lot of his problems just wouldn't be fixed by this. He wasn't dodging, he wasn't using Leap Slam to get away from things, and the stuff I talked about earlier where the game was trying to tell him to change something up and he just sorta didn't. To bring TJ's car metaphor full circle, it's like if someone tells you they built a car, but it sucks and doesn't work. You get in the car expecting the problem to be the parts they built it with, but then you drive around and realize a lot of the problems the guy is having are probably because he doesn't know how to drive stick. But moreover, the real weird thing with his review is the experience he had was completely different than mine. So let's review this game with his build. I have been playing Path of Exile since 2013. It is a game I know very well. I have over 800 hours in it, and it's a game that I nowadays sort of just passively play. If I'm hanging out with someone or watching a show, something like that. Playing this character gave me a reason to immerse myself in it again, to experience it with new eyes, and really take in how much it has improved since I first played. The game, as it currently stands, is not everything I wanted in a sequel to Diablo. It is so much more than that saying that is a disservice to it. The biggest difference between the two is the skill and ability system that's sort of a flipped on its head version of Diablo 2's. In Diablo 2, you would slot in a gem into your armor and it would give a slight stat bonus to that armor. And you'd have a skill tree that you use to unlock your spells and abilities, like, most video games would. In this game, you slot in spells and have a skill tree that gives you stat bonuses. Now, it's a very big skill tree, you'll notice, but every class has the same one. They just start in different places. So, if you want to make a witch that hits things with hammers, you could just creep down into the Marauder side and take all of his stuff. Also, you can combine the gems you get with support gems to make these crazy combinations of dumb bullshit. It's a lot of fun. And it's still very much going for that same Diablo 2 tone, while very much trying to distinguish itself. I feel the thing that is most emblematic of this is the new soundtrack, especially in the first act. Played next to Diablo's 2 soundtrack, they sound very similar in tone, but Path of Exile has many flourishes that are undeniably its own. It pays homage and takes what it will from Diablo, but never forgets that it is its own game. It feels free to explore different avenues of horror. Where another game, trying to be more like Diablo, would put a similar focus on demonic mythology, this game explores other areas. Maritime, ancient inventions, man-made horror, and indecipherable, unwieldy creatures. This creates an atmosphere and lore that is able to give itself its own very distinct tone in the big world of ARPGs, focusing on themes of rulers never learning from history, forcing time to repeat itself, hubris overrun, people in great places of power making horrible creations with massive costs of life, and becoming divine not through heroics, but becoming so consumed in anger, jealousy, and sadness that you cease to be human. The lore in this game is really good, and the next video I do might just be a lore breakdown for it. The gameplay also pays a lot of homage to Diablo, but never feels that it needs to be anchored to it. It's free to make improvements and changes where they might have needed to go. The addition of 10 acts makes the game feel full. It gives you a chance to even go back and see how your actions affected the people that you encountered, for better or worse. And even in the slow acts, there's always something to keep you interested. You might be running around Act 6, and Einhar will show up and it's time to hunt beasts! Or Act 8 will roll around and you'll just go down into the mines with Nico for a little while to break the grind. Sometimes, suddenly you'll run into an abyss, or there will be a Vaal dungeon you can run around in. Maybe an intervention assassins will show up to suddenly give your build a vibe check. But now we should talk about fighting the bosses with this build. TJ had a lot of trouble fighting the bosses in this game. And that's entirely understandable, especially if you're a new player. The end act bosses are a challenge, especially if you don't know the game terribly well. You will die a lot. You might die so quick you can't do any damage to them. And, of course, this was the first time I had fought these bosses with a really bad build since I started playing the game. And it was the most fun I've had with Path of Exile in years. When playing the game for the first time, you could use a build guide if you're the kind of person who likes to play D&D and fucking power game, but if you make a good build, you'll kill these bosses in 10 minutes at most. Taking 20 minutes with these bosses, watching for their patterns, dodging when necessary, really gives a sense of finality to these acts, especially Dominus and Malachi. Like, these were built to be final bosses, and you can feel that. They're so much more mechanically interesting than the bosses before them, and Then, this design philosophy carries over to all of the gods in Part 2. All of the god fights are fantastic, multi-phase, mechanic-heavy battles, and having them take 20 minutes really gives you time to appreciate it. And I honestly believe this is how the game was meant to be played the first go-around. Also, yeah, like TJ said, the visual designs of these bosses are fucking ballin'. I expected to end this video with the words, yeah, if you play like this, no wonder you hate the game. But, when I beat the final boss, I just wondered how he could. It's a wonderfully made game with worlds to explore, a plethora of things to do, and great horrors to face. Maybe strap into a bad-on-purpose build and get reminded that there's a whole game out there before mapping. So, for the future of this game, Grinding Gear Games did kind of drop a bomb on us. Path of Exile 2! This is going to be another game with 7 acts that runs on the same client and is going to fix another problem a lot of people have. All of the support gem slots are not going to be in your gear anymore. They're going to be in the gems. So you don't need to fucking scrounge for gear with the right number of slots and colors, or try to spend all of your fucking chromatic orbs on that shit just to get it where you have the same gear slots as you did before with the gear that's now garbage. Also, you can turn into a war whelp. Super exciting stuff. Oh, right, and one last thing before I go. Now, I talked about this basically every other time I've talked about this game, but I do feel like I should mention the entire fucking game is free! Hey guys, welcome to YouTube Cribs. This is where the horrible murder magic happens. So, first thing we have is my waypoint. It's powered entirely by Satan. This is Alva's greed pile. Her fire seems to be a little bit out of control. I'm just gonna— oh no! This is my crafting bench. I have it connected to all of this bullshit machinery to make it craft better. And here we have the Council of Useless Assholes. They're wildly inefficient, so they always have a line. Aw, this guy brought his daughter. Dadsy, I want to go home.
I need to talk to Einhar.
Here's Navali. She seems to be playing her favorite game. And here's June and Xana's room. They're doing research on stuff, and I got them a fuck bed. Here, I'll zoom in on it. Xana? Whose skeleton is that?